The biting New York winter had a way of seeping into your bones, even through the thickest layers of threadbare wool. Khloe pulled her worn coat tighter, the fabric offering little defense against the relentless chill that clawed at her from the outside, mirroring the cold dread that often settled in her stomach. Her daughter, Emma, a small, precious bundle of warmth and vulnerability, was finally asleep against her chest, her soft breaths a fragile counterpoint to the rumble of the late-night bus. Khloe's head, heavy with exhaustion, occasionally dipped, fighting the persistent pull of sleep. She was on her feet for 10 hours straight at the diner, a greasy spoon on the Lower East Side where the tips barely covered Emma's daycare, let alone the ever-rising rent. Sunrise to sunset, she'd poured coffee, wiped sticky counters, and smiled until her cheeks ached, all while a constant, low thrum of anxiety hummed beneath her skin. It was just past midnight. The bus was mostly empty, save for a few late-shift workers and a man in a pristine navy wool coat, seated across the aisle. His face was obscured by the dim light, but his posture was rigid, almost impatient. Khloe had tried to make herself small, to keep Emma contained, but the child's slumbering weight naturally spilled over, taking up a sliver of the adjacent seat. Suddenly, a gruff voice, sharp and laced with irritation, cut through the quiet hum of the bus. "Could you maybe hold your kid tighter, or something? She's taking up the whole seat." Khloe flinched, her eyes snapping open, a jolt of panicked adrenaline shooting through her veins. Her arms instinctively tightened around Emma, who stirred, a soft whimper escaping her lips. "I'm sorry," Khloe whispered hoarsely, her voice rough with fatigue and shame. She's sleeping. I'll just..." Before she could adjust, Emma let out a piercing wail, the kind that seemed to echo off every grimy bus window, magnified by the confined space. It wasn't a fussy cry. It was the raw, desperate sound of a child abruptly awakened, disoriented, and perhaps feeling the unspoken tension in the air. Khloe's heart sank, a heavy stone plummeting through her chest. This was it. The public spectacle. The judgment. The bus driver glanced in the rearview mirror, his expression a tight mask of annoyance. "Ma'am, can you get her quiet? People are trying to get home in peace." "I'm trying," Khloe pleaded, gently bouncing Emma, her own eyes welling up with tears she desperately tried to blink away. The cold from the wintry New York night still clung to her coat, and her hands trembled, not just from the chill, but from utter exhaustion and despair. 10-hour shift, no sleep, a sick child, and now this public humiliation. "Shh, baby, please," she murmured close to tears herself. Emma's cries only grew louder, escalating into a full-blown tantrum. Heads turned, phones were subtly raised, and whispers and eye-rolls spread like wildfire through the bus. Khloe felt a hot flush creep up her neck, her cheeks burning. She was failing. She was failing her child, failing to keep her quiet, failing to be invisible. She just wanted to disappear. Then, a warm, calm voice spoke beside her, cutting through the cacophony. "Excuse me, may I try something?" Khloe turned, startled. It was the man from across the aisle. He was mid-30s perhaps, dressed far too well for this late-night bus. A navy wool coat, soft leather gloves resting on his lap, and eyes that, despite his earlier gruff comment, now looked surprisingly kind. He gave a reassuring, almost gentle smile. "I've got nieces," he said. "Sometimes a new pair of arms makes all the difference." Khloe hesitated. Everything in her life had taught her to be cautious, to not rely on others. Her ex-partner, Mark, had bolted the moment she told him about the pregnancy, leaving a trail of broken promises and a mountain of debt. Her mother, her rock, had succumbed to a swift and cruel cancer before Emma's first birthday, leaving Khloe utterly alone to navigate the treacherous waters of single parenthood in a city that felt indifferent to individual struggle. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But Emma was inconsolable, and the weight of the surrounding judgment was too much to bear. She nodded slowly, brushing a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. Carefully, she handed Emma over. The man took the child as though he'd done it 100 times before, tucking her gently against his chest. He bounced her slowly, whispering something Khloe couldn't hear, a soft, rhythmic murmur. Miraculously, Emma's sobs faded to hiccups and then to silence. Khloe stared in disbelief as her daughter curled up, content and safe in a stranger's arms. A wave of profound relief, so potent it almost buckled her knees, washed over her. "She likes you," Khloe murmured, a watery smile touching her lips. "She's warm and tired, that's all," he replied softly, his gaze still on Emma. Khloe's body, finally free of the immediate crisis, seemed to give out. Her head dipped heavy with exhaustion, and without realizing, she leaned against the man's shoulder. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply adjusted his position, then quietly removed his coat and wrapped it gently around Emma, tucking the fabric so she stayed warm, never drawing attention to himself. It was an act of kindness so simple and so rare that it didn't need words. Khloe slept. When she woke again, it was with a jolt and a panicked gasp. She blinked, disoriented, at the warm fabric around Emma, then looked up to see her daughter still peacefully asleep in the man's arms. "Oh my God," she whispered, pulling back abruptly. "I am so sorry. I didn't mean to. I must have. The man smiled, his voice calm as ever. "It's fine. You were exhausted. Anyone would be. If I had a child, I'd hope someone would step up when I couldn't." Khloe didn't know what to say. No one had shown her kindness like that in a long time. Emma stirred, blinking up sleepily. Her tiny voice broke the silence. "You smell like warm," she mumbled, snuggling back into his chest. Jack chuckled, a deep, resonant sound. Khloe turned scarlet. "Her name is Emma," Khloe said, half smiling now, half mortified. "And I'm Jack," he replied, still holding the toddler like she was made of porcelain. "Nice to meet you both." The bus began to slow at Khloe's stop. "This is us," she said reluctantly, reaching for Emma. Jack passed her gently, carefully, making sure the coat stayed wrapped around her. "Thank you," Khloe said, trying to meet his eyes, but she felt a strange shyness. I don't know what I would have done without you tonight." Jack shrugged modestly. "You'd have figured it out. You're doing great." Khloe stepped off the bus and stood on the sidewalk, watching as it pulled away into the snowy New York night. The windows glowed dimly, and she caught one last glimpse of Jack's profile before he was gone. She held Emma closer, the coat still wrapped around the little girl, and whispered, "We won't see him again, but he was nice, huh?" Emma murmured in her sleep, and for the first time in weeks, Khloe felt a little less alone. The simple warmth of the borrowed coat, still carrying a faint scent of pine and something else, something clean and comforting, was a tangible reminder of that fleeting connection. The apartment smelled faintly of damp carpet and reheated soup, a perpetual scent of struggle. Khloe pushed the door open with one shoulder, balancing Emma against her hip, a plastic grocery bag swinging from her free hand. The door creaked shut behind her with a familiar groan, a sound that always seemed to punctuate the end of another grinding day. Emma whimpered softly, rubbing her eyes, still groggy from her unexpected nap. Khloe sat her down gently on the threadbare couch, wrapping her in a thin, worn blanket before pulling off her own coat with a sigh that felt like it carried the weight of the world. The radiator clanked to life, doing little to fight off the chill that permeated the old building. She crossed the room to the small kitchen and stared at the near-empty fridge. The dim light illuminated a half-eaten carton of eggs, a few slices of bread, and a sad, wilting lettuce. She had enough for one more dinner. Canned beans, a few slices of bread, half a bottle of apple juice. Payday was still 3 days away, and the landlord's note, scrawled in angry red ink and underlined, was still stuck to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a wilting flower. Final notice. Rent due. Khloe sat at the table and dropped her face into her hands, her shoulders slumping. She had been applying for second jobs all week, overnight shifts, weekend cleaning gigs, anything that would pay, but no one had called back. Emma had come down with a cough, which meant daycare had sent her home early twice already, cutting into Khloe's already precarious hours at the diner. Her body ached from fatigue, but her mind wouldn't stop racing, trapped in a relentless loop of bills, Emma's needs, and the gnawing fear of eviction. Still, despite the whirlwind of stress, a quiet moment surfaced in her memory. The bus, the warmth of someone else's coat around Emma, the steady rhythm of breathing beside her, the rare, fleeting feeling of not being entirely alone. Jack. She didn't even know his last name. He hadn't asked for hers. But in that moment, when the world had felt too heavy, his shoulder had become her place to rest. She shook her head and sighed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Men like him did not cross into her life. Not really. Not beyond one quiet, fleeting night. 2 days passed. Emma's cough worsened, morphing into a rattling wheeze that made Khloe's stomach clench with anxiety. She gave her warm baths, rubbed her back with VapoRub, read her books until her voice went hoarse. She drank cold, stale coffee in the mornings and hurried through wet, slushy sidewalks to make her shift at the diner, slipping behind the counter before the manager could yell. Every dollar counted. Every minute of work was a lifeline. It was a rainy Wednesday afternoon when it happened. The bell over the diner door jingled. Khloe was pouring coffee into a chipped mug, her mind miles away, when she looked up and froze. Jack. He stepped inside, shaking the rain off his coat, his expensive leather briefcase held casually in one hand. He scanned the room, his gaze moving over the empty tables and worn booths, before his eyes met hers. He smiled, a small, almost shy curve of his lips. "Hello," he said. "Didn't expect to see you again." Khloe nearly dropped the coffee pot. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat. She set it down carefully and wiped her hands on her apron, the rough fabric doing little to absorb the sudden dampness of her palms. I didn't either," she stammered, forcing a nervous smile. "Small city, I guess." Jack looked around the empty diner, then back at her, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Busy today?" "Depends on the hour," she replied, her voice shaky, betraying her composure. "Would you like a table?" "Just coffee," he said. "Black." She nodded, grabbing a mug with fingers that trembled slightly. She poured the coffee, the rich aroma filling the air, and placed it on the counter where he had taken a seat. "Thanks," he said quietly, his gaze steady, unblinking. She nodded again, then turned away, pretending to clean a tray, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and curiosity. Why was he here? Was he following her? Did he want something? Jack said nothing more. He just sat there, sipping his coffee, watching her move behind the counter. No questions, no expectations, just presence. And Khloe, though her mind whirled with questions and a strange sense of unease, felt something almost like calm again. It was unsettling, this unexpected comfort from a stranger. The morning air was brittle, the kind that clung to her skin even through the thickest coat. Khloe trudged down the wet sidewalk, her breath fogging in front of her with each step. She was early. Emma had finally slept through most of the night, a rare blessing, and Khloe had decided to walk slower, enjoy the brief, fragile moment of peace before the grind began. But as she approached the diner, her footsteps slowed. Something hung on the front door. Paper bag. She looked around. No one was in sight. The street was mostly quiet, save for the faint honking of traffic in the distance. Carefully, she stepped up to the door and unhooked the bag from the handle. It was heavier than it looked. She opened it slowly and her breath caught. Inside were 2 canisters of infant formula, a small bottle of children's cold syrup, a box of tissues with cartoon animals on the front, and tucked between them, a folded note. Asterisk, I think Emma might need these. Jack asterisk. Khloe's fingers tightened around the paper. Her chest ached, an unexpected, raw sensation. She hadn't told Jack Emma was sick. She hadn't told him about the formula she could barely afford. Somehow he had noticed, and he had done this quietly, without announcement, without expectation. She carried the bag inside and set it on the counter, staring at it for a long moment. Her hands trembled. Half of her heart swelled with gratitude, a warmth spreading through her veins. The other half clenched with discomfort, a familiar knot of pride and suspicion. Was this kindness or pity? All day the bag sat behind the counter, a silent testament to an unsettling generosity. Khloe went through her shift as usual, taking orders, wiping tables, refilling coffees. But her mind kept drifting back to it, to Jack, to the way he had not said a word when he saw her working here. The way he had watched, not judged. But still, something twisted inside her. She couldn't shake the feeling of being seen, truly seen, in her vulnerability, and it terrified her. When her shift ended, she did not go home. She waited, and at 5:30, just as the rain began to fall again, the doorbell jingled. Jack stepped in, just as he had 2 days ago, his presence a quiet, undeniable force. Khloe stood behind the counter, her arms folded tightly across her chest, a defensive posture she hadn't realized she'd adopted. He noticed her posture immediately. "Hi," he said, his voice calm, but with a hint of question. "We need to talk," she said, her tone more tense than she meant it to be. He nodded slowly and approached the counter, placing his briefcase on the floor. "All right." She didn't soften. "I found the bag. I hoped you would," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I didn't ask for help." "No," he agreed. "You didn't. Then why?" Her voice cracked slightly, anger and confusion fighting to surface. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." The accusation hung in the air, thick with her years of guarded independence. He met her gaze calmly, his eyes holding a depth she hadn't noticed before. "Because you're raising a daughter on your own, working double shifts, and still find a way to smile at strangers. Because I saw you on that bus holding it all together when everything was falling apart around you. Because I recognized something in you." Her throat tightened, and she looked away, fighting the fresh sting of tears. "I'm not a charity case," she whispered, the words barely audible. "I never said you were," Jack said gently, his voice unwavering. "Then what am I to you?" she demanded, looking back at him, her eyes fierce. He hesitated, choosing his words with care, his gaze softening. "You're strong. You're doing something most people would collapse under. I didn't leave that bag because I thought you were weak. I left it because I see how hard you're fighting. And I respect that more than you know." Khloe's shoulders dropped slightly, the tension easing out of them like a slow exhale. Her eyes stung. "I don't know how to accept things like that," she murmured, her voice laced with a lifetime of self-reliance. "I don't expect you to," Jack replied. "Just know it came without strings. No pity, just respect." She looked at him for a long moment, torn between pride and something deeper, something that yearned for the simple, uncomplicated kindness he offered. Then she nodded once, barely noticeable, a tiny concession. And Jack, sensing she needed no more words, simply smiled and sat at his usual seat without another word. He ordered his coffee, and the quiet hum of the diner settled around them, a new kind of understanding unspoken but present. The sun peeked through the bare branches of Central Park, casting a soft golden hue on the sidewalks, still damp from last night's rain. It was colder in the shade, but Khloe had wrapped Emma snugly in her jacket, a small knit hat covering her curls. Jack walked beside them, hands in his coat pockets, matching their pace without rush. Khloe had hesitated when he first asked. Coffee at the diner had become familiar, a quiet ritual, but a weekend walk in the park felt like something more, something personal and vulnerable. Still, something in his voice, in the quiet sincerity of his eyes, had convinced her to say yes. They strolled past the playground where children laughed and chased each other, their breath fogging in the crisp air. Emma clung to Khloe's leg for a while, shy in Jack's presence, but eventually, her curiosity won out, and she reached up for Jack's hand. Khloe's breath caught, a surprising pang in her chest, but Jack simply smiled, adjusting his stride to her tiny steps, his large hand gently encompassing her small one. They sat on a bench overlooking the duck pond, Emma between them with a biscuit in one hand and her ever-present stuffed rabbit, now frayed and patched, under her arm. Jack leaned back, his gaze on the water. "You always come here?" "Not often," Khloe said, a wistful note in her voice. Only when I have enough energy to walk instead of taking the subway. And when I can afford the time. He glanced sideways at her. You seem more rested today. Khloe gave a soft, self-deprecating laugh. Looks can be deceiving. There was a comfortable pause, punctuated by the distant sounds of the city and the rustle of the trees in the wind. She looked down at Emma, who was humming to herself, lost in her own world. Then, taking a deep breath, Khloe spoke, the words tumbling out, raw and honest. Her father left when I was 3 months pregnant. Said he wasn't ready, that I ruined his life. She traced a pattern on her knee. Jack was quiet, letting her speak, his presence a solid anchor. My mom was my only support, my best friend. But she passed away before Emma turned 1. Cancer, quick and cruel. Her voice faltered slightly, the old pain still sharp. After that, it was just me. Working, juggling rent, diapers, everything. A tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. There were nights I'd hold Emma while she cried and pretend I wasn't crying too. Jack's jaw tensed, but he said nothing, just listened. I stopped trusting people, Khloe added, her voice barely a whisper. Not because I wanted to, just because I had to. It was safer that way. Emma tugged at her sleeve, and Khloe kissed the top of her head, a familiar comfort. Jack looked out at the water for a long moment, then turned to her, his expression thoughtful. My mom raised me alone too, he said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of distant memory. We had a 1-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. She worked 3 jobs. I remember nights she'd sleep on the floor so I could have the bed. She never said a word about how tired she was. Khloe turned to him slowly, surprised by the revelation. This man, in his expensive coat, with his quiet confidence, had known struggle. I remember she once sold her winter coat so I could go to a school dance. Jack continued, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. I didn't know until years later. She just smiled and said, it wasn't that cold that week. Khloe felt something shift inside her. A barrier she hadn't realized was still standing, beginning to crumble. This wasn't pity. This was understanding. I know what it's like to be broke, Jack added, his gaze meeting hers, open and vulnerable. To hear people say you won't make it. To feel small because of a number in your bank account. But I also know love when I see it. And I saw it in the way you held Emma that night. Khloe's eyes welled, but she blinked quickly, determined not to cry in front of him. I've been lucky, Jack continued, a faraway look in his eyes. Things changed. I worked. I invested, and somewhere along the way, I became the guy people assume was always rich. But I never forgot where I came from or the woman who taught me not to judge anyone by what's in their wallet. She taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the strength of your spirit and the love you carry. Just then, Jack stood and gestured for them to follow. Wait here a sec. He jogged to a small vendor stand nearby. A few minutes later, he returned holding a brown paper bag. He knelt in front of Emma and pulled out a small stuffed bear, soft and brown, with one ear slightly bent. It looked nearly identical to the worn-out rabbit she clutched. For you, Jack said gently. Emma stared at it wide-eyed, then slowly reached out and took it, her tiny fingers curling around the soft fur. Khloe was speechless. How did you? She began, her voice thick with emotion. I noticed hers was falling apart, Jack said, standing again. Found one close enough. Emma hugged the new bear tightly, not dropping the old one, but nestling them together against her chest. Khloe looked at Jack, something fragile and new in her gaze. No one's done anything like that for her, or for me. Jack shrugged, a small, genuine smile on his face. Maybe it's time someone did. And in that quiet moment, Khloe felt something she had not felt in years. Trust. Not hope, not dreams, just the simple, grounding belief that maybe, just maybe, this man was not going anywhere. The afternoon light filtered through the diner's windows, casting warm streaks across the faded tiles. Khloe wiped down the counter for the 5th time, more out of habit than necessity. The lull between shifts was the only time the place ever went quiet. Emma was with the neighbor today, finally getting over her cold. Her bright laughter now a regular sound in Khloe's small apartment. For once, Khloe could breathe. The doorbell jingled softly. She looked up and saw Jack step in. He wasn't in a suit today, but a comfortable sweater and dark jeans. Casual but neat. Still, he somehow looked out of place among the chipped formica and sticky menus. He gave her a small nod and walked to his usual seat. "You're early," Khloe said, setting down her cloth. "I figured I'd catch you before the dinner crowd," Jack replied, settling in. Something about the way he sat, the thoughtful, almost solemn look in his eyes, made her pause. He wasn't just here for coffee today. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Jack hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slim, folded pamphlet. He placed it on the counter between them. Khloe glanced at it. The title read, Harbor House, a support center for single mothers. "We opened our third center last month," Jack began, his voice calm but serious. "We provide housing assistance, job training, childcare support, legal aid. It's grown faster than we expected. We're at the point where we need strong leadership, people who truly understand what it means to walk through the fire." Khloe listened, unsure where this was going, but already feeling something tighten in her chest. He looked her directly in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "I want you to join us full-time as a coordinator for one of our support hubs." She blinked. "Me? But I'm just a waitress." "You," Jack said simply, his conviction absolute. "You know what this life takes. You've lived it. You're smart, compassionate, resilient. You don't just survive. You carry others with you. That's exactly what the women at Harbor House need. Someone who truly understands." The room seemed to shrink around her. She stepped back slightly, her hand brushing the edge of the counter, a wave of disbelief washing over her. "I don't know what to say." Jack tilted his head, a gentle smile. "Say you'll think about it." She swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. "Why me?" "Because I believe in you," he said, his voice unwavering. "I've seen you in the toughest moments, holding your daughter, wiping her tears, even when you had your own. You've been honest with me. You haven't asked for anything, and that makes you the kind of person I trust with everything." Khloe crossed her arms, suddenly feeling exposed, vulnerable. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said quietly, her voice tinged with the old resentment of being a burden. "I didn't ask for you to bring me gifts or offer me jobs." "I know," Jack said, his voice still steady. "That's why I'm offering, not giving. There's a difference." She shook her head, the conflict raging within her. "It still feels like charity. Like I'm your project, your good deed of the month." His expression shifted slightly, a flicker of hurt, but not anger. "Khloe," he said gently, leaning forward, "I didn't come to you out of guilt. I didn't invite you in because I think you're helpless. I offered this because you're powerful, because I see leadership in you that you don't see in yourself yet." She opened her mouth to protest, but he wasn't finished. "I grew up with a mother who was exactly where you are now. She worked nights, went without meals so I could eat, smiled when she was breaking inside. And I saw the world judge her, talk down to her, but she never let it stop her." He leaned further forward, his voice quiet but intense, his eyes holding hers. "I remember watching her sleep on the floor so I could have the bed. She never told me we were poor. She just lived with love. She taught me what strength looks like. And when I saw you on that bus, tired, carrying your child, still finding the strength to smile, I saw her. I saw my mother in you." Khloe felt her throat tighten, a wave of overwhelming emotion washing over her. Her fingers gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white. "I'm not trying to save you," Jack said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I'm asking you to join me. Not because you need me, but because I need someone like you. Harbor House needs someone like you." The words landed deep, resonating in a place she had kept locked away for years. For a moment, Khloe said nothing. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Her heart told her to say yes, to embrace this unexpected lifeline. But her scars whispered no. warned her of the inevitable abandonment. I can't, she said finally, her voice quiet, fragile. I'm just not ready. I don't know if I can be who you think I am. Jack didn't push. He only nodded, his gaze still kind. I understand. She looked at him, her eyes full of something between apology and fear, the fear of daring to hope. I'm sorry. Jack smiled softly. You already are. Later that night, Khloe walked home slowly under the dim glow of streetlights. Emma's hand was wrapped around 2 fingers, swinging gently. The air was crisp, the city buzzing faintly in the distance. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but somewhere inside, a part of her, a tiny, hopeful spark, had begun to wonder, what if she said yes? The rain had been falling nonstop since dusk. Cold, relentless sheets of it drummed against the windows of Khloe's small apartment, blurring the city lights outside. Inside, the air was heavy with worry, thick with the metallic scent of fear. Emma lay on the couch, cheeks flushed, her small body burning with fever, whimpering softly. Khloe sat beside her, a damp washcloth in one hand, the phone in the other. The urgent care clinic had closed early due to localized flooding. The pharmacy said the delivery would take hours Emma didn't have. Khloe's heart squeezed with helplessness, a familiar, suffocating feeling. She tried calling her neighbor, no answer. She called her diner manager, asking to miss the morning shift. They hung up on her. Then, without thinking, acting purely on instinct, she called Jack. He answered on the first ring, his voice surprisingly alert. Hello. Emma's really sick, Khloe said, her voice breaking, tears finally spilling over. She's burning up. I don't know what to do. The clinics are closed, and I can't get medicine. Her voice dissolved into a sob. I'm coming, Jack said, cutting her off gently, his tone firm and reassuring. Stay with her. I'm on my way. 15 minutes later, a heavy, urgent knock echoed at the door. Khloe opened it to find Jack, soaked from the rain, holding a bag of medicine in one hand and a small pot in the other. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his expensive coat dripped water onto her worn floor, but his eyes were focused, concerned. I stopped by the late-night pharmacy, he said, stepping inside and pulling off his coat. Got the fever reducer, electrolyte packets, and some ginger rice porridge. I asked them to heat it up for her. Khloe stared at him, stunned. You really came. He looked at her and gave a small, almost teasing smile, a hint of the man she'd first met. Of course I came. That's what people do when someone needs help. He placed everything on the table, then knelt beside Emma, his large hand gently brushing her damp curls from her forehead. Hi, sweetheart, he whispered. Rough night, huh? Emma whimpered again, her eyes barely fluttering open. Let's try this medicine, Jack said gently, already opening the child-proof cap. Then I'll tell you the best story you've ever heard. Khloe sat in silence, watching, as Jack cradled Emma in his lap, coaxing her to drink the medicine with soft words and infinite patience. He held her close, humming a low tune, until Emma's eyelids began to droop. When she finally fell asleep, her breathing easing into soft, even rhythms, Jack gently set her down and covered her with a blanket. Then he turned to the stove and reheated the porridge. Let her eat in the morning if she's up for it, he said. Khloe stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, watching him move with quiet competence in her tiny kitchen. You didn't have to come, she whispered again, the words tasting like guilt. It's the middle of the night. Jack shrugged, ladling the porridge into a bowl. That's when people need someone the most. Khloe stepped forward, her voice shaking, raw with emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. I don't know how to do this. Be cared for. Jack turned, his eyes meeting hers. All my life, she said, tears rolling down her cheeks before she could stop them. People have left. Emma's dad, my mom, friends. Every time I needed someone, they disappeared. So, I just stopped expecting anything. It hurts less that way. Jack crossed the room slowly, his movements deliberate. He placed a hand gently on her arm, his touch warm and steady. "You don't have to do this alone anymore," he said quietly, his gaze piercing through her defenses. "I'm scared," she whispered, the admission a fragile thing. "I know," he replied, his thumb stroking her arm. Suddenly, a sleepy voice piped up from the couch. "Mommy!" Khloe rushed over, kneeling beside Emma. "Yes, baby. I'm right here." Emma reached out, but instead of grabbing Khloe, she wrapped her little arms around Jack's neck as he knelt beside them. "If you were a pillow," she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep, "I'd never want to let go." Jack laughed softly and pulled her close, his eyes meeting Khloe's over Emma's head. Then, still holding Emma gently, he looked up at Khloe. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice a quiet promise. "You and Emma, you're home now. My home." Khloe stared at him, tears silently falling. But these were tears of release, not despair. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. And in that moment, quiet, messy, real, he leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. It was gentle, sure, and filled with every unsaid word between them. A silent symphony of understanding and acceptance. When they pulled apart, Khloe rested her forehead against his, her fingers threading through his soft hair. "I don't know how this will work," she whispered, her voice still trembling. Jack smiled, a warmth radiating from him that chased away the last vestiges of the winter chill. "Then let's figure it out together." Outside, the rain began to ease, a soft patter replacing the drumming deluge. Inside, something new had begun, soft and certain, like love that grows slowly but stays. Spring crept into the city slowly, softening the sharp winds and coaxing pale blossoms from the stubborn branches. For the first time in years, Khloe greeted the season with something like hope. She had said yes. Yes to the job, yes to the cause, yes to something bigger than mere survival. At Harbor House, she found herself surrounded by women who reminded her of her past self. Young, tired, afraid, and yet fighting with fierce, quiet strength. Every day she stood before them, not as a broken version of herself, but as proof that healing was possible, that a new beginning was within reach. She helped arrange daycare, trained volunteers, ran workshops on budgeting and single-parent resources. Her days were long and often messy, filled with the raw emotions of women navigating crisis, but they mattered. She came home each night to Emma, who now ran into Jack's arms as naturally as her own, a testament to the new, unexpected family they were building. Together, Khloe and Jack launched a new project, an affordable housing development tailored specifically for single mothers, complete with on-site childcare, support staff, and safe outdoor space for children. One afternoon, as they toured the construction site with blueprints in hand and hard hats on their heads, Khloe paused at a sign being painted near the main gate. She squinted, then her eyes widened. "Wait, is that what I think it is?" Jack smiled, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. The sign, still wet with fresh paint, read, "Emma's Place. A new beginning for every mother and child." Khloe's throat tightened. She touched the painted wood gently, her fingers tracing the letters. "For her," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "For both of you," Jack said, stepping closer, his voice soft. "But mostly for her because she's what gave you your strength, and you, Khloe, you gave it to me." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she blinked them away, overwhelmed by the profound gesture, the depth of his understanding. Weeks passed. The building neared completion. Khloe flourished in her role. Her confidence grew with every decision she made, every woman she helped. Jack was always beside her, not to lead, but to support, to trust her judgment, to believe in her when her own faith wavered. Their partnership was seamless, built on mutual respect and a shared vision. Then one evening, while organizing documents at the office, Khloe accidentally opened an email left on Jack's screen. It was from an international investment firm, a name she recognized from financial news. The email offered him a multimillion-dollar contract to return as CEO of a tech conglomerate in London, a position of immense power and prestige. a contract he had declined. The date was from 3 months ago, just weeks after they had first met. Khloe froze, the words blurring on the screen. He had given this up. For them. For this. Later that night, as they walked home together beneath the soft glow of street lamps, the city's distant hum a gentle lullaby, she could not keep it in. "You turned down that job," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. Jack glanced at her, then nodded. "I did. It was everything," she continued, her voice trembling. "Money, power, prestige. I know what that means, Jack." She stopped walking, facing him, her eyes searching his. "Why?" He looked at her, his eyes steady, filled with a profound peace. "Because I already have everything I want." Khloe's voice cracked, tears returning. "You gave up all that for me?" Jack stepped closer, reaching out to cup her face gently. "Not for you, Khloe. Because of you. You showed me what matters. You reminded me that the best investment I could ever make is in people, in home, in love." He leaned in, his gaze tender, unwavering. "Because you, Khloe, you are everything." And in the soft silence that followed, she wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight, knowing finally that this love wasn't something she had stumbled into by accident. It was the love she had earned, the love that had found her right when she needed it most. The new harbor house stood tall and bright beneath the golden afternoon sun, its fresh coat of paint gleaming, windows wide open to let in the early summer breeze. Outside, a crowd gathered under a white canopy tent, filled with mothers, children, volunteers, and supporters, each face lit with hope. Khloe stood at the podium, her hair caught gently in the wind, her voice clear and warm as she spoke into the microphone. "I used to believe I was invisible," she began, her eyes scanning the crowd, a faint tremor in her voice that was quickly replaced by strength. "I used to think that because life had been hard, because I was a single mom scraping by, I didn't have value, that I had to survive in the shadows." She paused, glancing down at the front row where Jack sat with Emma in his lap. The little girl waved when their eyes met, making Khloe smile, a genuine, radiant smile. "But then someone reminded me that strength is not silence, that pain does not mean weakness, that motherhood is not a limitation, it's a gift." Applause rippled through the audience, a wave of affirmation. "I'm standing here today not as someone who was rescued, but as someone who was reminded of her worth. I now know I have value, and I promise to spend the rest of my life helping others see their own." As the applause grew, Khloe stepped back, blinking away tears. She turned to leave the stage, a profound sense of accomplishment washing over her. But before she could step away, Jack stood and walked forward, taking her hand. He turned to the crowd, a nervous laugh escaping him. "Before you all go," he said, his voice resonating through the microphone, "there's something I need to ask." He dropped to one knee. Gasps and delighted cheers erupted around them, a wave of excitement sweeping through the tent. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant ring, its single diamond gleaming in the sunlight. His voice was steady, though his eyes were filled with emotion, glistening with unshed tears. "Khloe, you gave me more than love. You gave me purpose. You gave me Emma. You gave me a future I didn't know I was missing." He looked up at her with a softness that made the world seem to disappear, leaving only them. "You gave me hope, and you gave me a family. Will you marry me?" Khloe's hand flew to her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks, a joyous, overwhelming torrent. "Yes," she whispered, nodding vigorously, unable to contain her joy. "Yes, Jack, of course." The crowd erupted into cheers as he slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a tender, fierce embrace. Emma, who had been watching wide-eyed, ran up and wrapped her arms around both of them, squealing, "Now we're a forever family." A few weeks later, they held a small wedding in the very park where Jack had once given Emma her first teddy bear. White chairs lined the green grass, soft music floated on the air, and Khloe wore a simple lace dress that made her glow like morning sunlight. Emma walked ahead of her, proudly scattering petals in a white dress with a pink sash, holding the bouquet as if it were made of gold. Jack stood at the altar, tears already in his eyes, his gaze fixed on the woman who had transformed his world. When Khloe reached him, they held hands and whispered their vows, not needing to raise their voices. Their love spoke loudly enough. They kissed to cheers and clapping, and as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of amber, pink, and gold, they wandered into the open field just beyond the ceremony. Khloe, Jack, and Emma sat down on a small plaid blanket beneath a tree. Emma curled up between them, her head resting on Khloe's lap. "Do you think sunsets ever get tired?" Emma asked sleepily, her voice a soft murmur. Khloe laughed softly, pulling her closer. "No, baby. They're just taking turns with the moon." Jack squeezed Khloe's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. And as the sky grew dim and fireflies began to appear, the three of them sat there, shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart, watching the day end and a new one begin, together always.